deal. Would you pray with me this morning? Say, Jesus, help me to be what you want me to be, do what you want me to do, because people without you go to hell. Okay, for the next 4 weeks rather, we're going to be talking about energy, the fuel of excellence. And we're going to take a look at the Sabbath. And Exodus chapter 20, verse 8, it says, "Remember to observe the Sabbath, keeping this day holy. You have 6 days each week of your ordinary work." It was the late 1940s. And it was a little farm outside of Hillsboro. And there was a farmer. And at that time, they had the 1940s tractors. And they got up early in the morning, went outside, looked at the field, and it was an exciting time on the farm. I don't know if you have farm background, but it was harvest time. The fields were full of crops, and the weather had been intermediate, and today it was dry, and the crops were ripe, and it was ready to go. Dad goes back in the house, yells at Mom, and they start getting the kids ready to go. They get the kids up. They had a 17-year-old, and they had 4 kids, the youngest being about 5 years old. They get the kids together, and they put them on the back of a hay trailer, or a cart of some kind, behind their old tractor. I don't know if it was old at the time, but it was one of those older tractors. And they put them on there, and they start driving down the road. As they're driving down the road, the 17-year-old that was sitting there grabs the 5-year-old and throws him off the back of the hay ride, and then they all laugh as this little 5-year-old tries to run and catch up to the hay, trailer again. But as he's driving, they had a neighbor, and the neighbor looked over, and the neighbor wasn't driving on the road with his tractor; she was driving in the field. But what was weird was, Dad wasn't going to his field that was ripe on the first dry day for a long period of time. Dad was going to church, Hillsboro Methodist Church, a hellfire and brimstone preaching little church on the prairie in the late 1940s. Now, my grandpa passed away about 5 years ago. He's 98 years old. And Grandpa was a neat guy, and he wasn't a loud guy. Grandma did the talking. I don't know if you know couples like that, but Grandma did the talking. You went, and he maybe said 10 words the whole time you were there. But when it came time for Grandpa to say a prayer at a meal, whether it be Christmas or Thanksgiving or something like that, Grandpa would go into King James when he prayed, okay? But there was nothing religious sounding about it. I don't know quite how to articulate, but when Grandpa began to pray around the table at Christmas time, he had a familiarity with the Lord that just said he had a hold of God. And no one ever questioned his faith. When he passed away, my aunt said he's the most Christian man that I ever knew. Actually, it's not quite what she said, because there were 2 pastors in the room, and she said he's the only truly Christian man that I've ever known, to which my uncle and I looked at each other, both of us being pastors, and she must not think too much of us. But in that time that my 98-year-old grandfather passed away, they began to share stories of his quiet, solid faith. And one of the stories that they shared was, now, I may have combined a couple of stories because I wasn't there, but Grandpa never worked on Sunday. No matter, it had to be a blizzard of blizzards for his tractor not to make it down the road to Hillsboro Methodist Church. And all of his kids had been involved in the church. One of his kids grew up to be a Methodist pastor who was the superintendent of the state of Wisconsin. He's retired now. And so God did amazing things, and they talked about that a number of times, that when everybody else was harvesting, and there were times when financially it made sense to harvest, he chose to trust God and would not work on Sunday. And that was his conviction. Now, my grandpa never pushed his convictions on anybody else. He had this quiet, solid faith about him that you just didn't argue with. It wasn't threatening, but you just admired it, Now, when I was in high school, there was a vote. Now, I was 18, so I could vote because I wasn't very good at high school. Okay, and so it was my first time I was ever voting. And one of the things that we were voting on was whether or not you would be able to work on Sundays in Fargo. This is when all the stores were so closed in Fargo on Sundays, and so I'm 18. I'm loving God, and I believed in God, but I thought to myself, I believe, in the Bible and stuff, but isn't it kind of hypocritical for us to go out and eat after church if we really believed in not working in the Sabbath? I mean, think about that, If you're going to vote to not let anybody work on the Sabbath, aren't you a bit of a hypocrite to go out to lunch after church, And so I didn't vote for it. I actually voted, I voted the stores could open because I thought to do anything else would have been kind of hypocritical because I like to eat out. And then my uncle found out. He really chewed me out because he thought that was a bad thing to do. But I thought, it didn't line up. Now, the Sabbath is the most unappreciated, unfollowed commandment that we have. And to make things even more complicated, Jesus deals with Sabbath. In Mark chapter 2, verse 27, they don't have it up there, but I'm going to read it to you. Jesus says to them, "The Sabbath was made to meet the needs of the people, and not the people to meet the requirements of the Sabbath." See, what happened was his disciples were doing things on the Sabbath. And people were criticizing him because they had strict rules about what you could and couldn't do on the Sabbath. Kind of entertaining, you can read some of the rules over the centuries of things that you couldn't do during the Sabbath. Doing all the cooking on Saturday, you couldn't take, you can only take so many steps on the Sabbath. But Jesus changes things up, and he says, you're not made for the Sabbath. The Sabbath is made for you. And so Jesus is saying, this is a gift from God to you, the Sabbath. And so that's why I was able to vote to have stores open, because I believe that the Sabbath, and Jesus is saying this too, that it isn't something that is a legalistic, because otherwise all pastors would be breaking the Sabbath all the time. It's the only day of the whole week that I actually work is on Sundays. And so, obviously that isn't quite what Jesus meant. So, the Sabbath made the top 10 of the 10 Commandments. It's the big top 10, the Sabbath is there. So obviously God feels strongly about it. And he feels so strongly about it that he says, keep this day holy. Now over the next 4 weeks, we're going to look at the Sabbath. Okay? And there's a couple of things that I want to encourage you with. We're calling this series Energy, the Fuel of Excellence. I believe God wants you to be excellent. I believe that there are mediocre Christians who are falling short of God's purpose and plan for their lives because they have fallen into the trap of mediocrity. And I think that sometimes I talk to somebody about struggles that they're having in their life, things that they're walking through, and as I look at them and what they're dealing with, I look and I say, you know what? You are tired. You're depressed. You're grumpy, you're worthless, you're not creative, you're not reaching out, and you are not obeying the Sabbath. Therefore, you fall into this level of mediocrity, and that's not God's plan for your life. And God needs you to be your best to accomplish the purpose that He has created for you in this life. And so, this black sheep of the Ten Commandment family is one that I believe that the enemy uses to go in and to steal the Sabbath away from God's people with feelings of guilt for not working hard enough, with feelings of busyness and exhaustion. He steals that away, and what you're left with is not excellent. What you're left with is mediocrity. Americans use the term workaholic with a badge of honor. If you go to any other country, I'm going to read you something. There's a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about over the next 4 weeks. If you want to do some reading, some of the best books I've read, The Power of Full Engagement. There's another one called The Power of Habit, and another one called Getting Things Done by David Allen. And I really love it when you get a book that has lots of research and lots of science and lots of studies, and then they prove stuff that the Bible already said. I find that fantastically entertaining, which is totally the case with the things in this book. But just to put this in a little bit of perspective, I want to read you a little something here. And this is This is a study that was done in Japan. And they studied how many people? I think it was a lot of people. Lots and lots of people, I mean. And they have a word called Kruse, which is death by overwork. I'm not saying it even close to the pronunciation for that, but it's a Japanese word that literally means to die from overwork. And they found that this happened when extremely long hours interfered with normal recovery patterns. They were working nights, working without holidays or breaks, high-pressure work without breaks, extremely demanding physical labor, and stressful work. What these 5 factors have in common is a pattern of chronic energy expenditure with the absence of recovery. The number of Japanese workers that worked more than 3,120 hours a year, an average of more than 60 hours a week, increased from 3 million, okay, yeah, see, it was a big number, it was millions of people in this study, 3 million, or 15% of the workforce, in 1975 to 24% in 1988. One case study described a worker who died suddenly at the age of 45. It turned out that he had worked 13 consecutive days, including 6 consecutive night shifts. His job was assembling engine parts for the Mazda Motor Company. And he worked in line at a speed of 2 minutes per car. The methods were devised to assure maximum efficiency and were so unforgiving that the workers had almost no time to recover. Under this production method, researchers concluded the worker resembles a mouse running helplessly on a rotating wheel to avoid electric shock. Now, that was a study that was done in Japan. Now listen to this. No compatible research has ever been done in the United States. But America is the only country in the world where employees work more hours than in Japan. America has a workaholic thing about our character. And it maybe comes from different things, but it just doesn't exist other places. A real epiphany for me was when I went to Norway, and it's where Inger-Lisa is from, and to see how much slower life moves. Now, it's a much more socialistic country. Taxes are extraordinarily high. There's blatant, they smooth out the wealth. If you start working in Norway, your first day of a real job, you get 4 weeks vacation, and it goes up from there. You get 6 weeks vacation, Inger-Lisa said. Start with 6 weeks vacation, it goes up from there. You get how many days for Christmas? So 3 days for Christmas. They get time off for Pentecost Sunday. They get Easter. Was that the big one?
Yeah, Easter.
A week for Easter.
Well, a couple of days.
Oh, okay, half a week for Easter. But the number of holidays they have. So not only do they get 6 weeks vacation, but they have way more holidays. If you let me tell you how popular I am in Norway. I'm sitting in Norway, I'm young, and maybe don't have all the wisdom I should have, which is still the case. And they're talking, one of Inger-Lisa's friends had just had a baby. Well, in Norway, if a girl has a baby, you get a year of paid leave from your job. They're required to keep your job, and the employer pays, not all of it, the government pays some, but the employer has to pay a large portion of that leave. And this one friend, she would just have, baby after baby, so I don't know when she ever worked. I think she quit her job then when she was done having babies. and so I asked her, and her name was Tuna, which I don't pronounce it right. It's not tuna the fish. It's actually, it has this sound that Norwegian has that I can't say. And I said to her, is it hard for young women to find a job? And she said, well, no. Why would it be hard? I said, well, because if I'm an employer and I have a 20-year-old guy or a 20-year-old woman, and I know she's going to be having some babies, I'm going to be paying somebody to do nothing, I would want to find a way to hire the guy, right? And she said, well, what's more important, family or business? And I said, well, family, unless it happens to be your business, okay? Which, like I said, they're a little more socialistic, and my capitalistic point of view was not exactly embraced all the way around. But it is uniquely American, okay? It is uniquely American. The rest of the world doesn't have this badge of honor that is working yourself to death like we do. And so I want to give you a little snapshot of what the next 4 weeks are going to look like. And so I'm going to show a little video. The guy in the video is one of the authors of this book. And I'm not taking everything from the book. We're going to be spending a lot of time in the Word. But I am going to, he's got 4 things he's going to talk about. And that's going to be the 4 things that we're going to talk about over the next 4 weeks. So go ahead and roll that video for me. EnergyProject.com has a lot of videos, and I found it very interesting that spiritual is their 4th one. I have no idea what his faith is. You know, it's a secular book. It's not a Christian book. So again, I just think it's so fun when people go out and do lots of research, and then the Bible actually already said it. I think that's kind of fantastic. So today, we're going to take a look at the physical, and so I am going to throw a lot of tips at you today, a lot of little things that, depending on what your life looks like right now, could be a big help. And then we're going to wrap up with talking about Elijah. The first one we're talking about is sleeping. This is going to be a good sermon, right? It's like sleep. And did you see my thing on Facebook? This is like how to do stuff for lazy people. So this is really good. According to the National Academy of Sciences, medical errors caused by fatigue among doctors account for nearly 100,000 deaths a year. More than from motor vehicle accidents, breast cancer, and AIDS combined. Sleep deprivation can cause depression. In large amounts, it can actually cause psychosis. You need about 7 or 8 hours of sleep a night on average for most people. Now, you may know some people that need less than that, and you may know some people that need more than that, but that is the average. If they isolate somebody, they've done studies where they isolate people and they don't allow any light. And out of 24 hours, on average, people sleep 7 to 8 hours is how much they sleep. Now, this is a few years ago, and this might be different now because of the way we have DVR and cable news and stuff. But for years, when people went to bed depended on where they lived in the country to watch the late night news. And so on average, as you moved west, they would stay up later and later because of the news. I read that. I thought that was interesting. And I want to talk to you about naps. 2 kinds of naps. We'll do the little nap first. There was a group of stockbrokers, and they're on the computer, and I forget the title, but they were doing the trades, 4 people. Very fast-paced, very intense, very stressful, and they would be at their desk all day long. And these guys would begin to go a little nutty. And so I think it was the guys who wrote this book, came in, and they were doing consulting for the company that had these guys that were doing this real intense trades and stuff. And what they trained these guys to do, because getting away from their computer wasn't an option, but because they had no breaks, they were going a little nutty, and they were completely burning out. And so what they did is they started having these guys once an hour sit back from their desk, close their eyes, and for 1 minute do a breathing exercise. And so they would just have a minute where they would lock into a habit. We'll talk about habits. I forget which week it is, but we're going to talk about mental. We're going to talk about habits in 2 weeks. And they would learn this habit of closing their eyes and having a 1 minute break, and their productivity went through the roof as a result, if they force themselves to stop and have that break. It is proven, and some companies do this, I've never actually worked at one, but I've read about them, that if you have a 30-minute nap at 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, your productivity for the entire day goes way up. And they've done study after study, and they've never found anything different than that. And so then as I was studying naps, because I really like naps, I learned that Winston Churchill, when asked about his schedule, he said every day, at I forget what time it was, I think it was 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I take off all my clothes, and I crawl into bed for 2 hours. And he said, because of that, I get 2 days for every 1 day. It was his claim. And then he said, well, maybe it's just a day and a half for every 1 day. But he believed in naps. John F. Kennedy, Thomas Edison were famous for their naps. Thomas Edison, Edison, light bulb guy, he would brag. I read this as well. he would brag that he never slept. I just work all night, I sleep all the time. And so this guy came to his office one day, and he claimed that he never slept. And he found Thomas Edison sleeping underneath his desk. And so he went back out, and he asked his assistant, I thought that he never slept. And the assistant laughed out loud and said, yeah, he never sleeps, but he naps a lot. Okay. And so he would just nap throughout the day. If you're somebody who has trouble sleeping, experts have some advice for you. Now, for me, if I have trouble sleeping at night, it usually means I'm stressed out. If I wake up at stupid times in the morning, it usually means I'm really excited about things. And so that's a lot more fun. But if you have trouble sleeping at night, one of the things that you can do is experts say, turn off your electronics an hour before you go to bed.